You have said the word peace more times than you can count. You said it at the end of a long argument, when you were too tired to keep fighting and you just wanted some peace. You said it standing in a dark hallway after midnight, listening to a house that had finally gone quiet. You have whispered it over a sleeping child, and you have prayed it beside a hospital bed when there were no other words left to say. But here's the strange thing about that small English word. When you asked for peace, you were almost never asking for silence. You were not asking for the fighting to simply stop. You were asking for the broken thing to be made whole again. You wanted the empty chair at the table to be filled. You wanted the cold distance between you and someone you loved to finally close. You wanted the thing that fell apart to somehow be put back together, exactly the way it was before. English handed you one thin little word for that enormous longing, and the word was simply peace. It is a good word, but it is far too small for what your heart was actually reaching for. There was a language that carried a much bigger word. In ancient Hebrew, the language the Old Testament was first written in, there is a word that holds everything you meant and could never quite say. The word is shalom. You say it shalomi. It appears in the Hebrew Bible more than 200 times, scattered all the way from Genesis to the very last of the prophets. And for centuries, the scholars who tried to carry that word into English kept running straight into a wall. Open 3 different Bibles to the exact same Hebrew word, and you will find 3 different English words staring back at you. One translation writes peace, another writes welfare, a third reaches all the way for the word whole. In other places, that same single word becomes prosperity, or safety, or simply the word well. Every one of those English words is grabbing a different corner of shalom. Not one of them is strong enough to hold the entire thing at once, because shalom was never mainly about the absence of war. It was about the presence of everything that should be there. Picture 3 things pressed tightly together inside one small word. The first is this: nothing is broken anymore, and every cracked and shattered thing has been mended and made new. The second is this: nothing is missing anymore, and every empty seat is filled while everyone who wandered off has come home. The third is the one that almost no one ever notices. Nothing is owed anymore, and every debt has been counted up and paid down to the very last coin. Wholeness, completeness, and a debt finally paid all live quietly inside that one small word. We are going to follow this single word through 5 moments in the Bible. It begins as a blessing, spoken aloud over a tired and wandering people in the heat of the desert. It turns up next in the hands of a terrified soldier who builds an altar in a field and gives it the strangest name you have ever heard. It becomes the title of a promised king, announced more than 700 years before he was ever born. It hides inside a letter, sent to a nation sitting in chains in a foreign land, a letter that should never have carried this word at all. And it arrives, finally, in one verse near the end of an old poem about a suffering man. In that verse, something happens to shalom that changes the word forever. It stops being a gift that you simply receive with open hands. It becomes a price that someone else has to pay in your place. There is a man standing in that verse. He is beaten, and he is crushed, and the word peace is resting quietly on his open wounds. By the time we finally reach him, you will understand why no single English word could ever carry all of this. But before we follow shalom into a single story, we have to understand the word itself. We have to find out where it was born and why it holds so much more than calm. Because once you see what is hiding inside this one ancient word, you will never hear the word peace the same way again. Every Hebrew word grows from a small root, usually 3 letters, the way a tree grows from a single seed. The root underneath shalom is 3 quiet letters that sound like sheep, L and M, and that root does not mean calm. It does not mean quiet. It means complete. To the people who first spoke this language, something was shalom when it was whole, finished, and lacking absolutely nothing. You have to understand the world this word was born into, because it was not a world of feelings. It was a world of stone walls and grain fields, of sheep counted at sunset and debts written down on clay. In that world, a wall was shalom when every last stone was back in its place and the gap was sealed shut. A flock was shalom when every single sheep had been counted at the gate and not one of them was missing. A body was shalom when the wound had closed, the fever had lifted, and the person was sound and strong again. Shalom was never a soft mood floating somewhere inside your chest. It was the real condition of a thing that had finally been made whole. And here is where the word does something you would never expect. That very same root, those very same 3 letters, also gave the Hebrew people their word for paying a debt back in full. when a man damaged something that belonged to his neighbor. The law said he had to repay it completely and make the broken thing whole again. And the word for that repayment was built from the very same root as shalom. So buried quietly inside the word for peace is the idea of a debt that has been completely paid off. Peace, in Hebrew, was the deep relief of an account with nothing left owed on it. Now you can begin to see why the translators struggled so badly with this one word. Open an old Hebrew dictionary to it and watch what the scholars are forced to do on the page. They cannot hand you one clean English word, so they start reaching for a whole pile of them at once. They write peace, and then welfare, and then health. They keep going and add prosperity, and safety, and soundness. They are not confused. They are simply being honest. One small Hebrew word is carrying a load that English has to split across a dozen words. Over the centuries, the word grew even wider and deeper than walls and sheep and clay tablets. It moved out into the open and began describing whole human lives. A life was shalom when the body was healthy, the home was at rest, and the person stood at peace with both God and neighbor. Shalom became the picture of a life with nothing broken in it, nothing missing from it, and nothing owed on it. It is not the silence that settles in after the storm has finally passed over. It is the whole world rebuilt after the storm, with every wall standing, every person home, and nothing left in ruins. And of all the words God could have chosen, this is the one he placed at the very end of his blessing. When God taught his priests exactly how to bless his people, he did not end with the word power. He did not end with victory, and he did not end with riches, and he did not even end with the word happiness. The blessing climbs upward through line after line, and the final word God hands them to speak is shalom. It is the very last thing God wants left ringing in the ears of the people he loves. May nothing be broken in you. May nothing be missing from you. May nothing be owed by you. So the first place we ever hear God breathe this enormous word over real people, they are not seated in a temple or a palace. They are standing in a desert, sunburned and bone-tired and far from home, while an old priest slowly lifts his hands above their heads. The old priest holds his hands out over the crowd, and the words come down slowly, one line at a time. He says, "The Lord bless you and keep you." He says, "The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you." And then he reaches the final line, the one the whole blessing has been climbing toward this entire time. "The Lord lift up his face toward you and give you peace." That last word, the one the blessing comes to rest on, is shalom. This is one of the earliest and gentlest pictures of the word in the whole Bible. So stop and notice exactly what kind of word it is here. The people are not told to go out and find this peace for themselves. They are not commanded to build it, or to earn it, or to fight their way toward it. The peace is simply laid on them, like a warm hand resting on a bowed head. It comes down to them from above, carried on the words of a priest and tied to the shining face of God. For a people this tired and this afraid, that is everything they have been aching to hear. They have been wandering through sand for years, never quite sure if God is still turned toward them or has finally turned away. And the blessing answers the one question their hearts keep asking in the dark. The face of God is not turned away from you. It is turned toward you, and what it is placing on you is wholeness. Here, by the way, almost every English Bible agrees and simply writes the word peace. But the worn-out people standing in that desert heard something far larger than calm. They heard a promise that nothing in their lives would stay broken, nothing would stay missing, and that the God who made them was facing them in love. You have spent so much of your own life trying to make peace happen with your two bare hands. You have tried to hold the whole family together, to keep the fragile thing from cracking, to carry the heavy weight all alone. But when God lays this word on his people here, it is not a job he is handing them. It is a gift he is placing on them, and all they have to do is stand still and receive it. We meet the same word again in a very different place, and this time it is not spoken over a calm and bowed crowd. It is spoken to one man, completely alone, who is shaking with fear and certain that he is about to die. His name is Gideon, and he lives generations after that desert, in the rough and violent days of the judges. Raiders from a people called Midian sweep through the land every harvest season and steal everything the farmers have grown. So we find Gideon hiding, beating out his little bit of wheat down inside a wine press. Trying to keep some food from being stolen, he is not a hero in this moment. He is a frightened young man doing his work in a hole in the ground. And there, in that hiding place, the angel of the Lord appears to him and calls him to go and rescue his people. Gideon argues, Gideon asks for signs. Gideon does everything a terrified man does when God asks far too much of him. And then it slowly dawns on Gideon exactly who he has been speaking to this whole time, face to face, in his world. People believed that to see God this closely was to drop dead on the spot. So Gideon cries out in raw terror, certain that his life is about to end right there in the field. And listen to the very first word God speaks back to him. The Lord says to him, "Peace to you, do not be afraid. You are not going to die." That word, dropped like a steady hand on a panicking man's shoulder, is Shalom. But then Gideon does something with that word that you would never expect. He builds an altar on that exact spot, out of rough field stones, to mark forever what happened there. And he gives the altar a name. The name he chooses is "The Lord is Peace," which in Hebrew is Yahweh Shalom. He did not call it "The Lord gives peace." He did not call it "The Lord sends peace when things are finally going well." He carved it far deeper than that. The Lord is peace. Peace is who God is. Gideon has stumbled onto something that the blessing in the desert only quietly hinted at. Shalom is not only a gift that God hands down to you from a distance. It is something that God himself simply is, standing right there in the room beside you, when you are hiding in your own winepress, sure that the very worst has finally come. The answer is not a calm feeling that drifts in and then drifts away. The answer is a person who climbs down into the hole in the ground with you and says, "Do not be afraid," and whose own name is wholeness. Gideon's altar stood in that field for generations after him, a pile of plain stones still quietly insisting that the Lord is peace. But the word was not finished growing. It was about to be carried into far heavier rooms, where peace would suddenly cost something, and where a whole world sat waiting in the dark for it to finally arrive. So far, Shalom has been a gentle word. It has been a blessing laid softly on bowed heads, and a steady name whispered to a frightened man in a field. These were the easy places for peace to live, the warm and quiet spots close beside the people God loves. But a word is only as strong as the darkest place it can survive, and Shalom is about to be dragged into the darkest places in the entire Bible. It is going to be spoken to people who have lost their homes, their freedom, and everything they once believed God had promised them. It is going to be carried into chains, and ruin, and a grief that simply refuses to lift. The real question is no longer what this beautiful word means. The real question is whether it can still hold up when an entire life has been completely shattered. That is exactly where the word goes next, down into the deep. The first stop down in the deep takes us to a prophet named Isaiah, more than 700 years before Jesus was ever born. Isaiah lived in deeply frightening times, in the long shadow of an empire called Assyria. Assyria was a war machine that swallowed nations whole, and everyone could feel it slowly coming for them next. The people were living in a kind of darkness, waiting for the day the soldiers would finally arrive and burn it all down. Into that darkness, with the enemy already on the horizon, Isaiah opens his mouth and makes an impossible promise. He says that the people who are walking in darkness are going to see a great light, and then he describes where that light will come from. And it is not an army or a weapon. It is a child, a son who is going to be born and handed to them like a gift. Isaiah says that the weight of an entire government will one day rest on this little child's shoulders. He calls the child Wonderful Counselor, and Mighty God, and Everlasting Father. And then the name we have been following, Prince of Peace. In Hebrew, that title is Sar Shalom, which means the prince, the ruler of Shalom itself. Now watch how far this one word has traveled in a single line of Isaiah. In the desert, Shalom was a gift placed gently on the heads of the people. With Gideon, Shalom was a name carved onto a pile of altar stones in a field. But here, Shalom is no longer only something you receive or something you write on a rock. Here, Shalom becomes a person, a king with peace as his very title, seated on a throne. And Isaiah says one more thing about this king's peace that you simply cannot miss. He says that of the growth of this government and this peace, there will be no end at all. Sit for a moment with what that means to a people watching an empire march straight toward them. Every kingdom they had ever seen rose up, grew strong for a while, and then crumbled back into dust. But this peace, Isaiah promises, will only keep on growing, and it will never once run out. So when the darkness around you looks like it is finally winning for good, the promise is not that you will simply feel a little calmer about it. The promise is that a king is coming whose entire kingdom is wholeness, and his peace has no ending and no expiration date. The thing crushing you tonight will run out of strength one day. His shalom never will. But there was one painful problem with Isaiah's beautiful promise. The people had to wait for it. And while they waited, the very darkness Isaiah had feared came crashing straight down on top of them. Generations after Isaiah, an empire called Babylon came and did what Assyria had only ever threatened. Babylon swept into the land, broke the whole nation apart, and dragged wave after wave of people away into captivity. Picture them now. Prisoners in a foreign country, hundreds of miles from the home they were violently torn out of. They are surrounded by a strange language, strange gods, and the daily ache of everything they have lost. Their freedom is gone. Their homeland is far behind them. The future they had carefully planned has simply collapsed. As far as they can tell, sitting in the dust of Babylon, God has finished with them completely, and it is into that exact moment of despair that God sends them a letter. Written through the prophet Jeremiah, you would expect a letter to broken prisoners like this to be full of apology, or cold silence, or crushing judgment. Instead, God says something that should not even be possible to say to people in chains. God says, "I know the plans I have for you. They are plans for shalom and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope." Now here's the place where you can watch 3 English Bibles quietly disagree over this single Hebrew word. Open the English Standard Version, and God says He has plans for your welfare. Open the New International Version, and God says He has plans to prosper you. Open the New Living Translation, and God says He has plans for your good. Those 3 words, welfare and prosper and good, are all straining hard to carry the one word shalom, and not a single one of them quite says the thing the Hebrew is actually saying to these prisoners. God is not only promising them comfortable feelings, or money, or a few pleasant days up ahead. He is promising to take their completely shattered lives and make every single piece of them whole again. He means that nothing in them will be left broken, nothing will be left missing, and nothing will be left owed. He is promising all of that, while they are still sitting in chains in a foreign land. This is the dimension that the gentle blessings could never once show us. Shalom is not a word God only speaks after the rescue is finished and everyone is safely back home. It is a word God dares to speak into the very middle of the wreckage, while the chains are still on and the rescue is nowhere in sight. You may be sitting in your own kind of Babylon right now. Maybe your life came apart at the seams. Maybe you cannot picture your future at all anymore. Maybe a quiet voice keeps telling you that God has already moved on without you. And the word God speaks over that exact pile of rubble is shalom. He is not telling you that the ruins around you are not real. He is promising you that the ruins are not the end of your story. But even the exiles, holding that letter in their shaking hands, were left with one enormous and aching question. If everything is this broken, and the debt for all of it is this impossibly huge, then how could God ever truly pay it and make it whole? That single question is about to be answered in one verse, the heaviest one we will ever read. To find the verse where this word finally opens all the way, we have to go back to the prophet we already met. We have to return to Isaiah, the same man who promised a child called the Prince of Peace. Because Isaiah was shown more than one vision, he saw the King of Peace coming, but he was also shown the terrible price. Long before that king would ever wear a crown, Isaiah saw him in a very different shape. In one of the most haunting passages in the entire Bible, Isaiah describes a servant that almost nobody wants to look at. This servant is despised and rejected. He is a man of deep sorrows, well acquainted with grief. He is not handsome, and he is not impressive. People actually turn their faces away from him as he passes by. And then Isaiah says that this servant is pierced and crushed and beaten for wrongs he himself never committed. He is wounded for our sins. He is crushed for the very evil that we are the ones who actually did. This is the man we promised you all the way back at the beginning. The man standing inside a single verse. He is beaten, and he is bleeding, and the word peace is resting quietly on his open wounds. Now listen very closely to the exact words, because 3 Bibles are about to hand you 3 different keys. The English Standard Version says the punishment that brought us peace fell down upon him. The New International Version says almost the very same thing, that the punishment bringing us peace was laid on him. Both of those Bibles reach for that one familiar word, peace. But open the New Living Translation and watch the word suddenly change shape right in front of you. It says he was beaten so that we could be made whole, and whipped so that we could be healed. This time the word is not peace. This time the word is whole. And a 4th careful translation reaches for a different word again, saying he was punished for our well-being. 3 different English words now stand over that very same spot in the verse, and they are peace, and whole, and well-being. And underneath all 3 of them sits one single Hebrew word, the same word we have been chasing this whole time, the word shalom. And here, on this bleeding servant, the word finally shows you everything it had been holding back, because now, at last, that buried third meaning comes blazing up to the surface. Remember what was hiding down inside the root of this word. Back at the very start, the same letters that spell peace also spell the paying off of a debt, all the way down to the final coin. And here, on this servant, that meaning is no longer hidden underground. It is the entire point. The wholeness was never free. The peace always had a price tag quietly hanging on it. And the servant in this verse is the one who steps forward and pays the whole thing. Every broken piece, every missing part, every debt that we ourselves ran up is being counted out and paid in full on him. That is exactly why the word peace is resting on his wounds and not resting on ours. His wounds are the payment. His bruises are the receipt. The account is being settled inside his body so that ours can finally read 0. Now you understand why no single English word could ever carry this one word alone. Peace was true, but far too small. Whole was true, but far too small. Well-being was true, and still far too small. Shalom is somehow all of them at once. Nothing left broken, nothing left missing, and the entire debt paid down to nothing, in blood. And watch what happens when you carry this one word back across everything we have already seen. The gift laid on the tired people in the desert was real, and now you can see how it was ever going to be paid for. The name carved on Gideon's altar, "The Lord is Peace," was pointing all along toward a God who would become the payment himself. The Prince of Peace was always going to take his throne by walking through these wounds, and not around them. And the promise whispered to the prisoners in Babylon finally makes complete sense, because here is exactly how God planned to make the shattered whole again. One small word, stretched across the long centuries, had been holding all of these moments quietly together, and it held them together until it could finally arrive right here, on a servant, where the entire bill came due at once. Shalom is not the absence of your storm. It is the wholeness that someone else was wounded to buy back for you, and it has already been paid for in full. The servant in that verse was carrying something enormous, something the English language keeps quietly dropping on the floor. He was carrying shalom in its fullest and heaviest form, the wholeness that cost him absolutely everything. But when that word travels into your English Bible, most of the time it arrives as a single small syllable, the word peace, and you have to understand what that word usually means inside your own head. When you hear the word peace, you almost always picture the absence of something. You picture the fighting stopping, you picture a quiet house, you picture a calm and settled feeling somewhere in your chest. Peace, in English, is mostly a mood or the lack of trouble, and that is exactly where the quiet damage begins, because shalom was never first about a feeling, and it was never first about trouble simply going away. It was about a whole world being mended, every broken piece restored, every debt paid down to nothing. And when that giant word shrinks into a calm feeling, something painful starts happening to the people who read it. Picture a believer sitting in real suffering, the kind of suffering that does not lift for months. She reads a promise that God will give his people peace, and she takes it the only way English ever taught her to. She thinks God promised her a calm and settled feeling, and a life with the trouble finally gone. So she waits quietly for the calm to arrive. And it does not come, because her circumstances are still painfully hard. And slowly she begins to draw the most heartbreaking conclusion of all. She decides that God's promise did not work, or that her own faith is simply too weak, or that he has quietly walked away from her. But here's the thing she could not see. The promise was never broken at all. She was simply handed a word too small for her to recognize what God was actually saying to her. God never only promised her a calm mood while she waited there in the dark. He promised to make every shattered thing in her life whole again, and he had already paid the entire price to do it. The calm feeling she kept chasing was only ever one tiny corner of what she had truly been given. This is the loss, and it happens quietly in millions of Bibles, without almost anyone ever noticing. It is not that the translators got it wrong, and it is not that the church has failed anyone. The honest truth is simpler and sadder than that. English just does not own a word this big. There is no single English word that means whole, and at peace, and fully paid for, all in the very same breath. So good and careful people reach for the closest word they have, and a little of the meaning slips away each time. And the very same flattening quietly happens to the Prince of Peace himself. When we lose the real size of Shalom, that title shrinks down into a gentle and harmless little picture. We start imagining a soft, calm baby on a Christmas card, instead of a king who will set the entire world right. We forget that his peace means justice for the wronged, healing for the sick, and every broken thing finally repaired. We end up waiting for a slightly calmer life, when God was actually promising us a completely remade world. So if you have ever quietly felt that the peace of God somehow failed you, hear this very carefully. It was almost certainly not the peace that failed you. It was the small word that failed to carry it. The wholeness is still coming for you, every last piece of it, exactly the way God promised. And it is not a wholeness you have to earn, or manufacture, or feel your way into all on your own. It is a wholeness that has already been bought, and signed, and paid for in full by the servant in that verse. And that servant did not stay frozen forever inside Isaiah's ancient poem. He stepped out of those pages, and out of something far darker than any poem, still carrying your peace in his own scarred hands. That servant has a name, and you have known it all along. He is Jesus, and the verse in Isaiah was a portrait of him, painted 700 years before he ever drew a single breath. When the Apostle Paul later writes to a young church, he says something that lands like the final piece of this entire puzzle. Paul does not say that Jesus brings us peace, the way you might carry a gift to someone's door. Paul says that Jesus himself is our peace. He himself is our shalom. Stop and hear the echo coming all the way back from that field with Gideon. A frightened soldier once carved the words, "The Lord is peace," onto a rough pile of stones. And now, centuries later, that very same peace is standing up and walking around with a human face. But the most beautiful moment of all comes after Jesus has died and then risen again. His closest friends are hiding behind a locked door, terrified, sure that the men who killed their teacher are coming for them next. It is Gideon in the winepress all over again, grown men frozen with fear inside a sealed room. And the risen Jesus walks straight through the locked door and stands quietly in the middle of them. The very first thing out of his mouth is the oldest word in this whole story. "Peace be with you." He says shalom into a room full of raw terror, exactly the way God once said it to Gideon. And then he does something that closes the entire circle completely. He lifts up his hands, and he shows them his wounded side, and he lets them see the scars. These are the very wounds from Isaiah's verse, the wounds that bought the peace he is now speaking over them. The price and the gift are finally standing in the same room, inside the very same scarred body. Every single place we have traveled was quietly leading us to this one exact moment. The gift in the desert, the name on the altar, the promised king, and the letter to the prisoners all arrive right here. They arrive in a risen servant who is our wholeness, who paid for it himself, and who still says peace to frighten people behind locked doors. So here's the very last place this word wants to take you. You have been carried by Shalom through this entire story. Whether you ever realized it or not, it was placed on you as a gift. It was promised to you in the ruins, and it was bought for you in blood. But there is one more verse, and in it the word suddenly turns around and looks straight at you. In the Psalms, you are told to seek peace, and to chase after it, and to pursue it like something worth running hard for. For your whole life you have been trying to make peace by yourself, with your own two exhausted hands. But you were never asked to build this wholeness out of nothing. You were asked to receive it first, and then to go and carry it. You have been handed a shalom that cost you nothing and cost the servant absolutely everything. Now the same God who carried you turns and gently asks you to go and carry it to someone else. Pursue peace into the broken marriage. Pursue it toward the person who wronged you. Pursue it into the room that everyone else keeps avoiding. You are not the source of the peace. You are simply the one who now gets to hand it on. Think for a moment about how far this one small word has actually come. A terrified soldier heard peace inside a winepress, and never once dreamed that peace would one day have scars on its hands. A column of prisoners read of peace in Babylon, and never once dreamed the wholeness they were promised would be paid for on a cross. So let me leave you with one honest question to sit quietly with. Where in your life do you most need to receive this peace right now? And where are you being asked to carry it to someone else? Maybe you are the frightened soldier, still hiding and aching to hear the words, "Do not be afraid." Maybe you are the exile, holding on to a promise you cannot yet see come true. Whatever it is, Write one single word down in the comments below and let it stand there as your prayer. If someone you love is sitting in their own Babylon right now, send this to them so the word can go and find them too. And if you want to keep going deeper into words like this one, the words most of us have only ever read across the surface, then come and walk with us and subscribe. There are so many more of these still waiting for us, and we are only just getting started.